Alistair Finch, a name synonymous with corporate conquest, was about to close the deal of his lifetime. $300 million, a partnership that would reshape the energy sector, rested on a single dinner. Across the table sat Sheikh Rashid Al Hamad, a man whose wealth was as vast as the desert sands. But as the tension mounted and negotiations faltered, Alistair's frustration found a target: the quiet waitress serving their table. He mocked her, dismissed her, saw her as nothing more than furniture. He was about to learn that the most valuable assets aren't listed on the stock exchange, and that his cruelest mistake would lead to his greatest salvation. This is the story of how a titan of industry was humbled and a multi-million-dollar deal was saved by the one person he never even saw. The air in the private dining room of Aureole, a Michelin-starred sanctuary in Midtown Manhattan, was thick enough to be appraised. It was a cocktail of old money, new ambition, and the suffocating pressure of a $300 million deal hanging in the balance. Alistair Finch, CEO of Finch Global Dynamics, felt that pressure like a physical weight on his bespoke Zegna suit. At 42, he had the kind of sharp, predatory handsomeness that came from ruthless efficiency and a standing appointment with a personal trainer. His silver-streaked hair was perfectly coiffed. His jaw was perpetually tight, and his ice-blue eyes missed nothing, or so he thought. Tonight was the culmination of 6 months of brutal transatlantic negotiations. Across the polished mahogany table sat Sheikh Rashid Al Hamad, the head of the formidable Emirati Sovereign Wealth Fund. The sheikh was a man of quiet gravitas, his traditional gutra, a stark white contrast to the dark corporate armor of Alistair's team. Flanking the sheikh were his 2 senior advisors, and most importantly, his official interpreter, a nervous-looking man named Mr. Davies. The deal was for a joint venture in renewable energy, a massive solar project in the Arabian desert. It was Alistair's legacy project, the one that would pivot his oil and gas empire toward the future. But it was stalling. Every point, every clause was being met with polite deflections and frustratingly vague Arabic proverbs from the sheikh. "Mr. Finch," Davies the interpreter said, his voice strained. "His Excellency states that a house built on hasty sand will be claimed by the first wind." Alistair forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. It was the 3rd proverb in 20 minutes. And with all due respect, a ship that never leaves the harbor will never discover new lands. We have the finest engineers, the most robust financial modeling. The sand is not hasty. It is meticulously planned for. Davies relayed the message. The sheikh listened, his dark, intelligent eyes fixed on Alistair. He spoke again his Arabic, a smooth, flowing river of sound. Davies paled slightly. He says, the camel endures the thirst of the desert, but does not drink from a poisoned well. Alistair's facade cracked. He slammed a leather-bound folio onto the table, making the crystal water glasses tremble. Poisoned. What the hell is that supposed to mean? We've opened our books entirely. The transparency is absolute. It was in this moment of rising fury that the waitress entered. Her name was Aara. To Alistair, she didn't even register as a person. She was a function, a pair of hands that refilled water and cleared plates. She moved with a quiet grace, her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun, her uniform simple but immaculate. He saw her only as an interruption. As she reached to refill his water, his arm gestured wildly to emphasize a point to his own silent VP, knocking the heavy glass carafe from her hand. Icy water splashed across the table, soaking a corner of the deal's term sheet and darkening the sleeve of Alistair's suit. For God's sake! Alistair snapped, jumping to his feet. He didn't look at her face, only at the mess. Can you not even pour water? Do you have any idea what's happening in this room? The stakes unbelievable." The room fell silent. The Sheikh's advisors exchanged a look. In their culture, public humiliation of a subordinate was a grave offense, a sign of poor character. Aara froze for a fraction of a second, her face flushing with shame. I'm so sorry, sir. It was an accident." Alistair snatched a napkin and dabbed uselessly at his sleeve. "An accident in a place like this costs more than your weekly salary. Just clean it up and get out. We're trying to conduct business here." He dismissed her with a wave of his hand, as if shooing away a fly. She bit her lip, her eyes on the floor. Without a word, she gathered the spilled water with a cloth, her movements swift and professional, her humiliation a palpable aura around her. As she backed away from the table, she caught Sheikh Al-Hamad's eye. He gave her a look not of pity, but of something else, a flicker of shared understanding, perhaps even disappointment, directed not at her, but at his host. Alistair, oblivious to this subtle exchange, sat back down his mind, already back on the deal. He had no idea that the foundation he had just laid was not of sand, but of pure, unadulterated hubris, and the wind was about to blow. The atmosphere, already tense, had curdled. The spilled water was a physical manifestation of the deal itself, a mess spreading across the table, ruining carefully laid plans. Alistair, trying to regain control, pushed forward with a new line of attack, his tone sharp and impatient. "Let's move on to the profit-sharing model," he said, pointing to a chart in his presentation. "It's a straightforward 60-40 split, favoring your fund for the first 5 years to ensure immediate ROI. It's an incredibly generous offer." Davies, the interpreter, scrambled to keep up. He translated Alistair's aggressive pitch into what sounded like flat, clinical Arabic. The Sheikh listened, his expression unreadable. He then responded at length, his tone measured, but firm, gesturing occasionally to his senior advisor, a stern-faced man named Tariq. Davies listened, his brow furrowed in concentration. He began to translate, but he faltered. "His Excellency, he feels the spirit of the arrangement lacks soul." "Soul?" Alistair scoffed, leaning back in his chair with an incredulous laugh. "This isn't a church, it's a multinational energy project. We're talking about EBITDA and depreciation schedules, not soul. Can you please be more specific?" The Sheikh spoke again, this time with a harder edge to his voice. The word baraka was used several times. Davies swallowed hard. "He is referencing baraka, sir. It means a sort of blessing or sacred value. He says a project without baraka is a dead thing, a monument to greed that will not be blessed by God or respected by his people. He is concerned that your model prioritizes profit over the people the project will serve." Alistair's patience, already worn, tissue-thin, finally tore. "This project will create 5,000 jobs. It will power 1 million homes with clean energy. What could possibly have more blessing than that? Is this a negotiation or a philosophy seminar?" He was losing them. He could feel the deal slipping through his fingers like fine sand. The cultural chasm between his New York boardroom bluntness and the Sheikh's honor-bound, legacy-focused approach was too wide, and Davies was proving to be less of a bridge and more of a crumbling ledge. The Sheikh's advisor Tariq now spoke for the first time, his Arabic sharp and staccato. He clearly posed a direct, challenging question. Davies looked utterly lost. He stammered. He is asking about the water rights for the local Bedouin tribes, and how the sun's shadow, how it respects the old ways." "The sun's shadow," Alistair repeated, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "What in God's name does that mean? The solar panels are positioned for optimal photovoltaic conversion. It's science. We did an environmental impact report. It's all in the appendix section. See subsection 4. But Tariq wasn't satisfied. He spoke again, more insistently, using a phrase that sounded complex and poetic. It was clear this was a critical point of contention, a test of cultural and social understanding that Alistair's team had completely failed to anticipate. Davies went from pale to ghostly white. I'm sorry, Mr. Finch. The dialect is very specific. It's a classical form, referencing ancient poetry. I cannot grasp the nuance. The deal was dead. It was over. The room was thick with the silence of failure. Alistair saw 300 million his legacy, his victory, all evaporating under the harsh lights of the private dining room. The sheikh gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod to his advisors. It was the signal to leave. They began to discreetly gather their papers. Alistair felt a surge of pure, white-hot panic. He had to do something. But what his mind raced, but all he could see was the mocking face of his chief rival, Marcus Thorne of Thorne Industries, who had said Alistair lacked the finesse for a deal of this magnitude. It was in this moment of utter despair that a third voice entered the conversation. It was soft, yet clear as a bell. It was not Alistair's, his VP's, or the struggling interpreters. It came from the shadows by the service door, where the waitress Aara had been quietly standing, waiting to be dismissed. The voice spoke in flawless lyrical Arabic. Every person at the table, including Alistair, who didn't understand a word, froze. The sheikh and his advisors stopped their preparations to leave and turned as one toward the source of the sound. It was the waitress, Aara. She had taken a half-step forward, her hands clasped respectfully in front of her. Her earlier shame was gone, replaced by a quiet, dignified confidence. Her eyes, which Alistair had never bothered to look at, were a deep, intelligent brown, and they were fixed respectfully on the sheikh's advisor, Tariq. She continued in Arabic, her tone deferential, yet firm. He is not asking about the literal shadow of the sun, Your Excellency. He speaks of the shadow of the ancestors. He is asking how the project will honor the legacy of the tribes who have lived on that land for centuries. He is asking if their history will be erased by the reflection of 1,000 glass panels, or if it will be preserved and honored beneath them. Alistair stared, his mouth agape. It was as if a piece of the restaurant's decor had suddenly come to life and started reciting Shakespeare. His brain struggled to process the scene. The waitress, the clumsy girl he had berated, was not only speaking Arabic, but was dissecting the nuances of a poetic metaphor that had stumped a professional interpreter. Sheikh Al-Hamad leaned forward, his impassive mask replaced by a look of intense curiosity. He addressed her directly, a long and complex question. Aara listened patiently, then turned to Alistair. Her English was perfect, with only the faintest, unplaceable accent. "Sir," she said, her voice calm and steady, completely ignoring his earlier outburst. "His Excellency Sheikh Al-Hamad commends you on your technical and financial acumen. However, his concern is one of legacy. He explains that in his culture, wealth is not measured in quarterly earnings, but in the good one leaves behind for generations. He asks, beyond the jobs and the electricity, what will Finch Global Dynamics leave for the people of his land? Will you build schools? Will you invest in preserving their cultural heritage? Will you be a partner who understands that the ground beneath the project is not just dirt and sand, but the repository of a nation's soul?" The clarity was breathtaking. She hadn't just translated the words, she had translated the meaning. She had bridged the chasm in a single eloquent monologue. The interpreter, Mr. Davies, was staring at her with a mixture of awe and professional horror. Alistair's own VP, a stoic man named Peterson, had his jaw slack. Alistair couldn't speak. His mind was reeling. Who was this woman? Where did she come from? He tried to reconcile the image of the fumbling waitress with the poised, articulate cultural liaison standing before him. He cleared his throat, finding his voice at last. It was hoarse. Tell His Excellency, that we are prepared to establish a foundation, a significant one. $10 million to start, for education, for cultural preservation. Whatever he feels is most needed. Tell him we didn't come here to erase their history, but to help them build their future. Aara turned back to the sheikh and conveyed the message in her beautiful flowing Arabic. As she spoke, the tension that had been strangling the room for hours began to dissipate. The sheikh listened, and for the first time that night, a genuine smile touched his lips. He responded, and the energy in his voice had changed completely. It was warmer, more engaged. Aara turned back to Alistair. The sheikh is pleased. He says the truest well is not the one that is deepest, but the one that quenches the thirst of the traveller. He says your offer shows that you are a man willing to listen. He is now ready to talk. Alistair Finch stared at the waitress, who had just single-handedly resurrected his $300 million deal. He felt a dizzying cocktail of emotions, shock, relief, and a profound, gut-wrenching shame for how he had treated her. He hadn't just misjudged her. He had failed to see her at all. And in that gilded cage of a dining room, he realized he had been the most ignorant person at the table. The rest of the dinner was surreal. Aara, at the sheikh's gentle insistence, was brought a chair. She sat slightly away from the main table, a position of respectful intermediation. Mr. Davies was politely dismissed, and he scurried away with a look of profound relief. For the next 2 hours, Aara became the linchpin of the entire negotiation. Alistair would outline a technical point, and she would rephrase it not just in Arabic, but in a context that resonated with the sheikh's values. She spoke of the solar panels not as assets, but as a harvest of the sun's gift. She framed the community foundation not as a charitable write-off, but as planting a new palm tree in the oasis of their shared future. She displayed a staggering depth of knowledge. When the discussion turned to water rights, she referenced specific historical treaties between local tribes. When they discussed employment, she suggested a tiered system that would respect the traditional elder-led hierarchies. She was a translator, a cultural advisor, a historian, and a diplomat, all wrapped in a simple waitress's uniform. By the end of the night, not only was the deal back on track, it was stronger. The 60-40 split was agreed upon, but now it was attached to a detailed memorandum on the Legacy Foundation, which Aara had helped outline on a napkin. The sheikh was laughing, clapping Alistair on the back and inviting him to a royal falconry hunt in Dubai. As the sheikh and his entourage finally departed, full of promises, to have the final papers drawn up, by morning Sheikh Al-Hamad stopped in front of Aara. He bowed his head slightly, a sign of deep respect. Aara bowed her head in return. It was an honor to be of service, Your Excellency. Then they were gone, leaving Alistair, his VP Peterson, and Aara alone in the silent, cavernous room. The adrenaline of the saved deal began to fade, replaced by an awkward and heavy silence. Alistair finally turned to face her properly. He looked at her truly, looked at her for the first time. He saw the faint signs of exhaustion under her eyes, the intelligence that shone within them, and the quiet dignity in her posture. The shame he had felt earlier returned sharp and acidic. He started his voice, uncharacteristically hesitant. "I don't know what to say." Peterson, ever the practical one, stepped forward. "That was the most incredible thing I've ever seen in my career. Mr. Finch, we should hire her. Immediately. Name your price," he said, turning to Aara. "Head of Middle Eastern Relations, a 6-figure salary signing bonus. Whatever you want." Alistair held up a hand to silence his VP. This wasn't a transaction. Not anymore. "Before we talk about that," Alistair said, his voice low, "I need to apologize. My behavior earlier was inexcusable. It was arrogant, cruel, and I am profoundly sorry. There is no excuse for how I treated you." Aara met his gaze. There was no anger in her eyes, only a weary sort of acceptance. "Thank you, Mr. Finch. Apology accepted. But I have to ask," he continued, gesturing vaguely at the opulent room. "Who are you? How do you do all of that?" She gave a small, sad smile. "My name is Aara Hassan, and I know these things because once upon a time my family sat at tables like this, not serving them. And so the story came out. Aara was not just a waitress. She was the daughter of a prominent Syrian diplomat and a history professor from Damascus. She had grown up in embassies around the world, fluent in Arabic, English, and French before she was a teenager. Her childhood was one of learning, debate, and the art of international relations discussed over dinner every night. The specific poetic dialect the sheikh used was familiar to her because it was the formal language of diplomacy and high literature her father had insisted she master. Then the war came. Her world, a world of culture and privilege, was annihilated. Her family lost everything: their home, their status, their savings. They fled, becoming refugees. Her father, a man who had once advised presidents, passed away from a heart condition exacerbated by the stress of their displacement. Her mother was frail. Aara, with her younger brother, had made it to the United States under a special asylum program. She wasn't a waitress because she lacked skill. She was a waitress at Oriole in the evening and a part-time university library assistant during the day to pay for her brother's pre-med degree at Columbia and to send what little was left to her mother in a crowded refugee camp in Jordan. She was overqualified to an almost absurd degree, but her foreign credentials and refugee status made finding a position in her field nearly impossible. She was trapped by circumstance, a brilliant mind, hidden in plain sight, forced to be invisible just to survive. Alistair listened, the story washing over him in waves of disbelief and mounting horror. His entire worldview, a carefully constructed edifice of meritocracy and self-determination, began to crumble. He had always believed that people were where they deserved to be. The homeless man on the street, the barista, the waitress, they were in those positions because they lacked the drive, the intelligence, the grit that he, Alistair Finch, possessed in spades. But Aara shattered that illusion. She possessed more intelligence and resilience in her little finger than he had in his entire pampered body. He had mocked a woman who had endured more hardship than he could possibly imagine, a woman whose past was as gilded as his own, only to be violently stripped away. The $300 million deal, which had felt like the center of the universe just hours ago, now seemed trivial. The real revelation of the night wasn't a business victory, but a profound and deeply uncomfortable lesson in humility. He looked at Aara Hassan, no longer a waitress, but a survivor, a scholar, a diplomat in exile. "I offered you an apology," Alistair said, his voice thick with emotion, "but what you deserve is an opportunity. No more than that. You deserve restitution. Peterson is right. I want you to work for Finch Global Dynamics, but not just as a department head. I want you to be my personal advisor, a senior strategist. I'll pay off your brother's tuition." I'll help you get your mother here. Whatever it takes." He expected her to leap at the offer, to cry with relief. She did not. She looked at him, her expression thoughtful, and said something he never in a million years would have anticipated. "No, Mr. Finch. I don't think that's the position I'm interested in." Alistair was stunned into silence. "No." The word hung in the air, completely alien to a man who was used to buying whatever he wanted, be it a company, a yacht, or a person's loyalty. His offer was a golden ticket, a life raft. To refuse it seemed illogical, almost insane. Peterson, his VP, looked equally bewildered. "Ms. Hassan," he said, stepping forward cautiously, "perhaps you misunderstood. We're talking about a substantial compensation package, a corner office, a corporate car. This is a life-changing opportunity." Aara gave a small shake of her head, her gaze never leaving Alistair. "I understand the offer perfectly, Mr. Peterson, and I am grateful for it. But my life has already been changed more than once. I am not looking for a life raft." Alistair held up a hand to silence Peterson again, a flicker of understanding dawning in his eyes. He was approaching this all wrong. He was still thinking like a CEO trying to acquire an asset. "Then what are you looking for, Aara?" he asked, using her first name for the first time. His tone was different now, genuinely curious, not demanding. "Help me understand." She took a deep breath, the quiet waitress persona, shedding completely replaced by the confident daughter of a diplomat. "Mr. Finch, tonight you saved your deal because I was able to translate words. But the real problem was never the language. It was a failure of perspective. Your team prepared for a financial transaction. Sheikh Al-Hamad came seeking a partnership built on mutual respect and legacy. You almost lost $300 million because you didn't understand the soul of the person you were dealing with." She let that sink in. Alistair could only nod the truth of her words, hitting him with the force of a physical blow. "A senior strategist or a personal advisor," she continued, "would help you navigate future deals like this. I would make you more money. I would increase your company's global footprint, and I could do that job very well. But that's not what I want. It would be fixing a symptom, not curing the disease." "The disease?" Alistair asked. His pride stung, but his curiosity piqued. "The belief that the world revolves around a balance sheet," Aara said bluntly, but without malice. "The idea that value can only be measured in dollars, the corporate culture that allowed you to look at a human being and see only a function, an obstacle. If I take your offer, I become part of that machine. I want to help you build something new." Alistair leaned against the table, the fine mahogany cool against his hands. The room, which had been the site of his near humiliation and then salvation, felt like a confessional. "What do you have in mind?" This was her moment, her counteroffer. "You offered $10 million to create a legacy foundation to secure the deal, a gesture. But what if it wasn't just a gesture? What if it was the start of a new global arm of your company, the Finch Hassan Foundation?" Alistair raised an eyebrow at the proposed name. She was bold. It would be an independent entity. She went on, her voice gaining passion and momentum. "Funded by a percentage of profits from every major international deal you close, starting with this one. Its mission would be to do what your team failed to do, understand the human impact of your business. It wouldn't just build a few schools as a PR stunt. It would conduct deep cultural and social analyses before you negotiate. It would create sustainable community projects, resettle and retrain displaced populations, and offer scholarships, not just in the US, but in the countries you operate in. It would find people like me, overqualified, displaced professionals, refugees, and give them a path back to the life they lost. She paused, her eyes locking onto his. "I don't want to be your advisor, Mr. Finch. I want to be your partner. You have the capital and the influence. I have the perspective and the experience. You build the engines of progress. I will ensure they have a conscience. I will run that foundation. And its first project will be in Syria, when the time is right to help rebuild the very culture that men like the Sheikh hold so dear." The sheer audacity of her proposal was staggering. She wasn't asking for a job, she was asking for a kingdom. She wasn't asking for a salary, she was asking for a percentage of his global profits to fund a philanthropic enterprise she would control. She had seen the one crack in his armor, his dawning awareness of his own short-sightedness, and she was driving a wedge right through it. Peterson looked like he was about to have an aneurysm. A percentage of profits. That's unprecedented. The board would never approve. But Alistair wasn't listening to Peterson. He was looking at Aara, and he was seeing the future. Not just the future of Finch Global Dynamics, but a future for himself that was about more than just numbers. She was offering him the one thing he didn't even know he was missing, the soul the Sheikh had talked about. The Baraka. He thought about his rival Marcus Thorne. Thorne might be able to close a deal, but could he inspire this kind of loyalty, this kind of brilliant, audacious vision? No, Alistair pushed himself off the table and stood up straight. A slow smile spread across his face, a genuine smile this time, one that reached his ice-blue eyes and thawed them. "Peterson," he said, "get our legal team on the phone. Tell them to start drafting the charter for a new foundation, and tell them the profit percentage is non-negotiable." He turned back to Aara. "Ms. Hassan, you have yourself a partner." 1 month later, the nameplate on the corner office of the 50th floor of the Finch Global Dynamics Tower didn't read Alistair Finch. It read Aara Hassan, President, the Finch Hassan Foundation. Her office was nothing like Alistair's sleek, minimalist lair. Bookshelves lined the walls filled with volumes on history, sociology, and international law. Maps of the Middle East, Africa, and Southeast Asia were spread across a large central table. Instead of a single imposing desk, there was a round table in the center, designed for collaboration, not dictation. Aara herself was transformed. The drab waitress uniform was replaced by a chic but professional business suit. Her hair was no longer in a severe bun but flowed softly around her shoulders. The look of weary survival was gone, replaced by the focused, energized look of a woman with a mission. Her first days were a whirlwind. True to his word, Alistair had given her complete autonomy and a staggering budget. He had flown her mother from the camp in Jordan to a private medical facility in New York for a full health assessment. Her brother's Columbia tuition was paid in full with a stipend for his living expenses. Alistair had removed her burdens so she could focus entirely on the foundation, but it was not an easy transition. The corporate culture at Finch Global was a shark tank. VPs who had spent decades clawing their way up the ladder were deeply suspicious of this waitress who had been handed an entire floor and the CEO's ear. They saw her as a flight of fancy Alistair's strange pet project. They whispered about her in the hallways and tried to obstruct her initiatives with bureaucratic red tape. During one particularly hostile budget meeting, a bulldog of a man named Henderson, the head of European operations, openly challenged her. "With all due respect, Miss Hassan," he began, the words a thin veneer over his contempt. "I fail to see how funding a study on 14th century Yemeni water preservation techniques is a prudent use of company resources that could be funding our LNG terminal expansion in Hamburg." The room was silent. All eyes were on Aara. It was a direct challenge to her authority. Aara didn't flinch. She simply turned to the screen and brought up a satellite map. Mr. Henderson, our primary competitor, Thorn Industries has been trying to secure a deal for geothermal energy in Yemen for a year and has failed. Why? Because the local tribes are blocking it. They believe modern drilling techniques will disrupt the sacred aquifers their ancestors have managed for 700 years. She then clicked to a different slide showing ancient schematics. This study which you mock details how those systems work. It shows a profound understanding of sustainable water management. Instead of going in and telling them our way is better, my team is drafting a proposal that integrates our technology with their ancient techniques. We won't be disrupting their heritage. We will be honoring and upgrading it. Sheikh Al-Hamad has already heard of our approach through his own channels. He called it an act of profound wisdom. When we are ready to make our move in Yemen, we won't just have a business plan. We will have the blessing of the people brokered by the most respected leader in the region. She looked directly at Henderson. Your LNG terminal will give us a profit for 10 years. This approach will give us a foothold in an entire region for the next 50. Do you have any other questions about the prudent use of resources? Henderson sank back into his chair, speechless. The room was silent, but it was a different kind of silence now. It was the silence of respect. Alistair, who had been sitting at the back of the room, observing, felt a surge of pride. She wasn't just his conscience. She was a strategic genius. She was making his company smarter, stronger, and more resilient. Later that day, he found her in her office, staring out the window at the sprawling city below. You handled Henderson well, he said, leaning against the doorframe. He's not wrong to be skeptical, she replied without turning. For people like him, value is a simple equation. It's hard to see the world differently. I was one of those people, Alistair admitted quietly. A month ago, I would have been on his side of the table. She finally turned to face him. And now, he said, walking further into the room, I'm learning to read a different kind of balance sheet. I had a call with the Sheikh this morning. He's not just signing the solar deal. He wants the foundation to be the official charitable partner for his sovereign fund. He's injecting $200 million into our initial operating budget. Ilara's eyes widened. Alistair, that's transformative. It was the first time she had used his first name. It felt natural, a sign of their evolving partnership. He said, Alistair continued, a small, humbled smile on his face, that a man is known by the garden he keeps. He told me he was honored to be planting a new one with us. With you. In that moment, the power dynamic between them was finally truly level. He was no longer the billionaire CEO who had saved a waitress, and she was no longer the refugee who had saved his deal. They were two partners standing on the 50th floor, looking out at a world of possibilities they were going to reshape together. The foundation wasn't just her project anymore. It was becoming the very soul of his entire company. Of course. Here is an expanded and more detailed version of Part 7, delving deeper into the Foundation's work, the characters' growth, and the emotional culmination of their journey. 2 years can feel like a lifetime, or the blink of an eye. For Alistair Finch and Aara Hassan, it was both. In that time, the Finch-Hassan Foundation ceased to be an appendage to a corporation and became its very heart, pumping a new kind of purpose through the arteries of global commerce. It was a revolution waged not in boardrooms with hostile takeovers, but in remote villages with patient conversation. Their success was not a straight line, but a series of hard-won battles against cynicism, bureaucracy, and the deep-seated corporate belief that profit was the only rational god. The first true test came not in the familiar sands of the Middle East, but 10,000 feet up in the stark, breathtaking beauty of the Peruvian Andes. Finch Global Dynamics had secured the rights to a vast lithium deposit, a critical component for the clean energy future Alastair was so intent on building. On paper, it was a flawless project, geologically sound, financially lucrative. But the local Quechua community's descendants of the Inca were blocking the initial surveys. They were not protesting for money or jobs. Their resistance was more elemental. The proposed mining site was on the slopes of Apu Inti, a sacred mountain spirit they believed was the source of life and balance for the entire region. To scar the Apu was to invite famine, flood, and chaos. The old Alastair would have dispatched a team of lawyers and lobbyists, drowning their superstitions in a flood of legal injunctions and cash settlements. The new Alastair, however, made a call. 2 weeks later, he found himself shivering in the thin, cold air of a village community hall, a simple adobe structure smelling of wood smoke and damp earth. He was dressed not in xenia, but in layers of practical fleece and hiking boots. Across from him sat the village elders, their faces a roadmap of hardship and dignity, their silence a formidable wall. Aara was not there. This was part of her method. She knew her presence as president of the foundation would create a formal artificial dynamic. Instead, she had sent her advance team. This consisted of Dr. Mateo Vargas, a quiet, thoughtful Bolivian anthropologist whose academic career had been derailed by political upheaval, and a young Quechua-speaking community organizer from Cusco. For a month, they didn't talk about the mine. They lived in the village, shared meals, helped harvest potatoes, and listened to the stories told to children. They learned the cosmology of the Apu. Now it was Alastair's turn to listen. Through an interpreter, the lead elder spoke. "You see a rock full of metal, Senor Finch. We see the sleeping place of our ancestor. You want to take its heart for your batteries and your cars. You ask us to trade our soul for a schoolhouse. This is not a bargain we can make." Alastair didn't argue. He didn't counter with economic projections. He simply nodded and said, "Thank you for sharing your truth with me. Help me understand more." For 2 days he listened. He walked the slopes of the Apu with the elders who showed him the ancient terraces their ancestors had built, now lying fallow. They showed him the sacred springs that flowed from the mountain's base. On the 3rd day, Aara arrived. She walked into the community hall, greeted the elders in phrases of Quechua that Mateo had taught her, and unrolled a new set of plans on the wooden table. "Distinguished elders," she began, her voice respectful, "we have listened. We understand. The heart of the Apu must not be touched." Her finger traced a new boundary on the map. "Our geologists have confirmed that the primary lithium deposits can be accessed from the western face, leaving the sacred eastern face, the one that greets the morning sun, completely untouched. We will not scar the sleeping place of your ancestor." She then unrolled a second map, this one topographical. "We know your ancient terraces are in disrepair. It is our proposal, before any mining begins, to invest in restoring them. We will bring in hydrologists and agricultural experts chosen by you to help you bring them back to life. Your mountain will not just power our future. It will feed your children for generations to come as it did for your ancestors." Finally, she looked the lead elder in the eye. "We will not build you a schoolhouse. We will provide the funds and materials for you to build it, using your own traditional techniques to your own design, employing your own people. It will be your school, not ours. A portion of the mine's profits every year will be placed in a trust managed by a council of elders to be used for the good of your communities forever." The silence that followed was profound. The elders looked at each other, a silent, complex conversation passing between them. The old Alistair would have been sweating, fidgeting. The new one sat calmly respecting their process. Finally, the lead elder turned to Aara and then to Alistair. He spoke in Quechua, his voice thick with emotion. The interpreter translated, "You came to listen. You heard not just our words, but our spirit. You have shown respect. You have honored the Apu. You may proceed. You are welcome here." That night, as they flew back to New York, Alistair stared out the window of the jet at the endless chain of mountains below. "Thorn Industries tried to get that same deposit last year," he said quietly. "They offered twice the money we did. The deal imploded in a storm of protests." "Thorn offered them money," Aara replied, looking over some notes. "We offered them dignity. It's always the better currency." This philosophy became their hallmark. While news reports showed riots at Thorn's cobalt mines in the Congo and lawsuits from indigenous tribes in Brazil, the Finch Hassan Foundation was being lauded by the UN as a new model for ethical development. Aara's team of displaced talents was its secret weapon. Dr. Anya Sharma, a brilliant hydrologist forced out of Kashmir, developed revolutionary water purification systems for their projects. Kenji Tanaka, a Japanese architect whose firm went bankrupt, designed buildings that blended modern engineering with ancient aesthetics. They were a team forged in loss, and it gave them a profound and humbling empathy that no Ivy League business school could ever teach. Alistair's relationship with Aara had settled into a rhythm of deep trust and intellectual sparring. Late one evening, they were the only two left on the 50th floor, the city a galaxy of lights below them. They had just secured another victory, a complex energy deal in Southeast Asia. "My father would have loved what you did in Peru," Aara said, suddenly breaking a comfortable silence. "He once spent a week negotiating a trade agreement that was stalled. The other side wouldn't budge. He found out the lead negotiator was a passionate orchid enthusiast. So my father spent 2 days at the National Botanical Garden. He came back to the table and didn't mention the deal. He talked about the unique pollination process of the ghost orchid for 20 minutes. The man was so impressed by his respect for his passion, he signed the deal that afternoon." She smiled sadly. "He always said, 'Find the other man's garden, and you will find the key to his castle.'" Alistair looked at her, seeing the shadow of the great man she came from. "My father's advice was different," he confessed, his voice low. "Find the other man's weakness, and you will find the key to his ruin. For a long time I thought that was strength. And now?" she asked softly. "Now I know it's a prison," he said. "It isolates you. It makes every room a battlefield. You've shown me how to build bridges instead of walls." It was a moment of profound intimacy, a confession of the soul. He wasn't her boss, and she wasn't his employee. They were two people who had fundamentally altered the trajectory of each other's lives. This new trajectory reached its zenith at the grand opening of the All-Noor Solar Array, the project that had started it all. The desert air was filled with the scent of expensive oud and roasting lamb and the sounds of traditional music. Sheikh Al-Hamad stood between Alistair and Aara on a ceremonial platform, the setting sun glinting off the million mirrored panels that stretched to the horizon. The Sheikh's speech was eloquent. He praised the technology and the investment, but he focused on the partnership. "We did not just build a power plant," he declared, his voice echoing in the twilight. "We have built a testament to the idea that progress does not require the erasure of the past. We have honored the shadow of our ancestors while embracing the light of the future." Then it was Alistair's turn. He stepped to the podium, not with the aggressive confidence of the man he once was, but with a quiet, powerful humility. He looked out at the assembled crowd, his eyes finding Aara's. 2 years ago, he began. I sat in a restaurant in New York, across from His Excellency, believing I had all the answers. I believed that power was measured in dollars and legacy was measured in stock prices. I was a fool. I came here to conquer a market, to win a negotiation, and I nearly lost it all because I was blind and deaf to what truly mattered. He paused, taking a deep breath. The most valuable discovery I made in this endeavor was not a new way to harness the sun. It was the discovery of a person whom my arrogance had rendered invisible. A woman who taught me that a company, like a person, must have a soul to truly prosper. She taught me to serve a people, not just a bottom line. This entire project, everything we celebrate today, and everything the Finch Hassan Foundation will achieve tomorrow is because of her. The legacy is hers. Later that evening, as the celebration continued, Alistair and Aara walked away from the lights and the noise, their footsteps silent on the cool desert sand. They stood together, looking out at the immense, silent solar array, a sea of glass drinking in the moonlight. "Do you ever think about that night?" Alistair asked, his voice barely a whisper. "At Oriole, I remember everything. The way I knocked the water from your hand, the sound of the glass on the table, the look on your face. I remember feeling like I was disappearing," Aara admitted. "Like all the parts of me that were my father's daughter, the scholar, the diplomat. They were fading away, leaving only the uniform. I'm so sorry, Aara." He said the words heavy with 2 years of reflection. "I was the blind one. I looked at you and saw a waitress. I failed to see the leader, the visionary, the partner who would redefine my entire life's work. The shame of that moment, it still finds me sometimes." Aara turned to him, her face illuminated by the distant lights, her eyes deep and full of a profound grace. "Don't let it, Alistair. That man is gone. In a strange way, we needed that moment of collision. Without your arrogance, my desperation would have remained silent. Without my voice, your deal would have failed. We were two people trapped in our own worlds, and we needed to crash into each other to be set free." He looked at her, at the incredible woman who had turned his soulless empire into a global force for good, the woman who had become the anchor of his new world. The bond between them was a quiet, powerful current that ran deeper than friendship, more steadfast than any business partnership. "Well then," Alistair said, a genuine warm smile finally reaching his eyes. He reached out, not in a formal gesture, but to place his hand gently on her arm, a familiar touch of profound partnership and affection. "To crashing into each other. To the future we build from the wreckage," she replied, her own smile radiant. As they stood together, equals in every sense of the word, a shooting star blazed a silent, brilliant trail across the vast Arabian sky. They knew this was not an ending. It was the true beginning of their story. They were no longer just building a business. They were building a legacy of light. The story of Alistair Finch and Aara Hassan isn't just about a saved business deal. It's a powerful reminder that every single person we meet has a story we know nothing about. The person pouring your coffee, cleaning your office, or waiting your table could be a scholar, a hero, a survivor with a universe of experience hidden behind their eyes. Alistair's journey from arrogance to humility shows us that true strength isn't about never falling. It's about having the grace to admit when you are wrong and the wisdom to embrace a better path. Aara teaches us that no matter how dire our circumstances, dignity, intelligence, and courage can never be taken from us. If this story of unexpected heroism and second chances moved you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories that challenge our perspectives. Let us know in the comments below, has there ever been a time when you completely misjudged someone only to be proven wrong in the most surprising way? We'd love to hear your story. Thank you for watching.